Hello, everyone. So, a few hot button issues are popping back up into the spotlight. I wanted to address them. They seem to me kind of like the most American, like stereotypical American things that are going on. So, I guess in that way, like this Trump presidency is making us, I guess, I don't know, have an identity crisis or something. Yeah, well, the three things here are guns, free speech, and tax cuts. So, I mean, guns, I don't even have to say why that's American, of course. We'll get into that. Free speech, we're obviously not the first people to have really invented free speech, I guess you could say. Um, where So something that I guess is supposedly, I don't want to sound like a authority here, but something that's special about our country, I guess you could say, is that it was meant to be a deviation from like a monarchy where like you have a centralized person of power. There's delegated powers in our system. There's three branches of government, and the free speech thing. I mean, that's just. Oh, I would say it's supposed to be a way to speak truth to power, but ultimately what happens in our system is money and politics corrupts things, and a battle of ideas is not really a realistic thing in our system. It just is not, because Bernie, someone like him who is very issues oriented and very diligent in the way that he tackles issues. I mean, honestly, his decisions have only bolstered that fact that he's very politically adept. So the fact that he can't really succeed on a full scale level in the system is part and parcel to the power of the establishment. They wield so much power, and the special interests are all kind of aligned against there being a change to the status quo. This is what they're built around. So the idea that you're going to use free speech to change the government, this used to be, I think, a real thing. You can look back at a lot of historical figures, including Martin Luther King Jr., I would say. But now, even though speech certainly does have its effects, on people in the American population. I mean, Bernie's the most popular politician in the country. In terms of changing things policy-wise, it has become ineffective. Then tax cuts, we see this with a lot of different people. I mean, everyone's kind of in agreement that you cut taxes for the middle class. At least you say that you want to. And then others will say, you got to cut taxes for the wealthy. Obviously, the wealthier interests would say that, and also people in the middle class that are, bamboozled by Republican talking points and truly believe in this trickle down theory, which I'll, get into later. But let's get back to the issue of guns. Now, I just want to stipulate off the bat, I'm not a hard lefty on guns. One example of this would be I'm not for bans on specific classes of guns, including AR-15s. I'm not for banning those simply because it's not going to breed a environment where it's going to be beneficial to everyone. It's going to be, people are going to be able to buy it on the black market if they want to. It's going to be more underground, and we're not going to know enough about it. If it's legal, if it's a legal product, we can regulate it and know what we're doing with it. I mean, this is the reverse of legalizing marijuana with some people. I mean, they're like, oh yeah, it's an illegal drug trade. It's awful. So there's really no demand for an AR-15 right now, right? they say we have a gun problem, and people are crazy buying AR-15s. So let's make it illegal and make it like the black market thing that it is with weed, and it's so dangerous. So there's a contradiction there that I don't agree with. However, we should have smarter gun regulations. Of course, we need a universal background check to start. I mean, I'm going to get back to that to kind of explain it more in detail, but we shouldn't be allowing the sale of these bump stocks, which have been used in mass shootings, the most recent one in Las Vegas. And it's been deemed the most deadly mass shooting, in modern U.S. history. I believe the number was 52 or something like that killed, and 400 or more injured. So this is getting into really grotesque territory here. This guy who did it, we don't seem to know much about him. What he was thinking, like what motivated this to happen. Nothing political that we can glean. His family said he was not very political or religious at all. So we don't know. Like maybe this guy was just crazy. I guess we can't really know what he was thinking. But regardless, these bump stocks that he used to modify his weapons, the sole purpose that they have is to make it easier to make your gun fully automatic. It turns a AR-15, which is a semi-automatic gun, meaning you have to shoot the trigger to fire and keep pulling the trigger in order to shoot. I mean, you do it each individual time. Yeah. So with a bump stock, what it does is use the recoil from firing the first shot, and I guess it's a hydraulic system or something like that. It uses the recoil to keep shooting. It's like an automatic weapon. And people on the right are trying to explain this away and be like, oh, it's inaccurate, so maybe it saved lives. That's what Tucker Carlson said. I mean, this is absurd. Okay, this guy had his hotel room staked out. There were 2 windows that were broken out, and he was shooting. He was shoulder firing this weapon at a crowd that was it was a concert, and it was like he was right in front of it. I mean, when you're talking about like it saved lives, how is it possible that it saved lives and it's the most deadly mass shooting ever in modern history? It just doesn't quite add up, does it? I mean, it's ridiculous what people will go to try and just ignore common sense on gun regulations. Because, again, we shouldn't go too far, I feel like. We have to have respect for the fact that our country historically has been different. So we cannot... we have to grandfather this in. And I think that's totally possible, and it is going to be effective in the end at minimizing these problems. So the government should not be in the business of making it easier for people to do these kinds of attacks. That's what this bump stock, that's what this problem is about. It's making it so easy for people to basically just have a fully automatic weapon. It's not modifying the gun, yeah, of course. We understand, we all understand what it does. But it's making it easier for people to just fire off more rounds at a time as they please. And I don't think we should be in the business of doing that. We should be minimizing that. So as far as universal background checks go, we have to close certain loopholes that are in place. And a recent Harvard study concluded that 20 million guns were sold without background checks in this country, or that it's around 40% of gun purchases or transfers, gifts, and you can inherit a gun from your relative. I think there should be more federal standards that are stricter. There should be more involvement with background checks from the government. But yeah, we can grandfather in these special cases when people have guns that maybe have been in their family for I don't know how many years. Um, we just have to set up a system, in my opinion, that makes it conducive for people to tell the truth. So if you can, just prove that you're not being nefarious, you're not a criminal, you have no criminal record, or any of these things, like you're not likely to cause any harm. Have someone come and talk to you, and it's as simple as that. We can have the thing documented. We're not trying. We shouldn't make it out to be like we're trying to catch people. I mean, obviously, there's an aspect of that where you have to be nonpartisan and be objective, but we should just make it better for people to come forward and just be honest. And if the people that are nefarious are not going to come forward, it's just that simple. I mean, so you're going to get people that come to you and want to abide by the law and, ostensibly want the government to be caught up with what they're doing in terms of guns. I mean, I just don't think it's that much to ask, honestly, because as time has gone on in this country, guns have changed. It's just simply true. You can't deny that guns haven't changed. And so all I would say is that we have to update our laws. Stricter federal standards, as I said, training, interviews, maybe, and a psychological evaluation, excuse me. And then this is where the pro-gun people are going to come in and say, that's taking it too far, because then it's not a right. Then you're making it like it's a privilege that's granted to you by the government. Well, this is just not true, because it's not a fundamental right. I mean, read the Second Amendment, first of all, because I'm guaranteeing you it's definitely very vague, to say the least. But we have background checks already. Okay, so it's not like just anyone can own a gun. The government does have a certain say over who can own a gun. This is true now, so we can expand upon that. That's all that we should be doing. We should be trying to have a more common sense system of people looking into guns in this country. And I think government control over that could be efficient if we have a priority to make more jobs. I think that goes back to infrastructure, like in general. Like we need to invest more in American jobs and rebuilding America. And we can do this by creating more things that need to be done, such as having a more efficient gun background check system. So then we go to free speech and the NFL protests. Of course, it's been news, everywhere. Most recently, of course, Mike Pence flew to Indiana and staged this PR stunt, basically, and he went to the game pretty much knowing he knew that he was going to leave, that they were going to kneel, during the national anthem, I guess. And he left, and he said, he told the press, like, stay out here, I'm probably going to leave, like, something to that effect. And then came back and went on Twitter and, all this nonsense. I mean, it's quite funny to me, because the right loves to make fun of the lefties and the SJWs and, like, oh yeah, they're so triggered by everything. And now you have Mike Pence over here going on social media and being a little darling and going like, I stand with President Trump, and I stand against anyone who disrespects the military and the flag and the anthem and all these things. Well, okay. Here's the thing. It has nothing to do with denigrating any of those things. Colin Kaepernick has said from the very beginning, all the way back when this happened at first, in before the 2016 election, he said it was about police brutality, and he was taking a stand by saying, I'm not going to stand for the flag or the anthem. I'm not going to stand behind that idea if I feel like it doesn't fulfill that in reality. Now, look, it does draw eyeballs, of course. People are going to notice that. And he knowingly did that because he's using his spotlight, his celebrity status, to address important issues. And that's a very noble thing, okay? It's not the same thing as being, like, triggered over issues and then, like, you want to censor people, like Mike Pence is basically doing. It is just, antithetical to what the idea of free speech is supposed to be in America. It's supposed to be, I may not agree with what you have to say, but I agree that you have the right to say it. So, as long as the owners in the NFL are okay with it, then it shouldn't be a problem. So it's a private industry. These players could get fired, or something could be done to the team. Whatever it might be. It's within their right to do that. But so far, we're seeing people basically being able to express themselves however they want so far. I mean, I've heard rumors that some advertisers might be pulling out, and of course there's people on social media disavowing their support for the NFL, burning their clothes and all these things. You're just dumb. You're just burning your own money. So that's whatever to you. I mean, it's just meaningless because who cares what you think? I mean, what are you proposing to help the country with? It's like you don't even see that things are going wrong, actually. That things are totally unstable with Trump being a man baby on Twitter, just out and out provoking Kim Jong-un, and he's threatening he's going to leave the Iran deal, which is going to make it more likely that Iran gets a nuke. This is just, fact, because that was the whole point of the deal. The whole point was that we can go in with the IAEA and regulate their nuclear capabilities. And without the deal, they're under no obligation to listen to us. So, yeah. And we violated the deal first, by the way. So there's already kind of reason to believe that Iran is not, that they don't think of us as very trustworthy. So at the end of the day, when it comes to this free speech thing, people being upset by these kind of protests, it's nothing new. I mean, look at the civil rights movement, and you had people that were marching in the streets, and racists would yell things at them, and they would hold Nazi regalia. They would, in some certain cases, they'd kill people and hurt people, all kinds of things. It was an awful time. At the end of the day, for some people, there's no way to express your opinion, even if it's nonviolent. People will complain and sometimes go even further than that, as I just said. And this is, again, entirely antithetical to what the values of America are supposed to be. If you truly believe that people in the military are fighting for your freedom, and then at the end of the day, you say you don't have a freedom. If you're in the NFL, oh, and we'll get to why the NFL specifically, I guess. But if you're in the NFL, you have to stand for patriotism. That's a requirement now for being in the NFL. Again, they're a private industry. They're entitled to have that standard if they want. But having people put this kind of pressure on the players, and Trump doing that specifically. I mean, he said basically these people are sons of bitches and they should be taken off the field. They should be fired. And people have kind of pointed out that this is not really a very ethical use of the presidency, to say the least. This is just, it's madness, okay? So you can't do a nonviolent protest. You can't be kneeling during the national anthem even though you're not hurting anyone. Or, then they go on the other extreme and they're too violent, like with Black Lives Matter. And with that, I mean, and like something like Antifa, yeah, I have to say, like, maybe you can take it a little too far at certain points. But at the end of the day, like, these conservatives just don't want to hear you. They just want to take your voice away, which is exactly what they accuse the left of doing all the time. So now we go to tax cuts. We're going to close out with that. What the Republicans are proposing is just a Wild West, basically. It's, trickle-down economics, cutting taxes for the wealthy. And we're doing that, paying for it, by cutting Medicare and Medicaid, most likely. I mean, if it was both of them, the effects of that would probably be quite devastating and just, basically just another economic downturn for us. This is just dangerous fiscal policy, as I'll get into. I mean, there may be some tax cuts for middle class people if they're passed. I wouldn't necessarily hold my breath. I mean, because if we see a version of that at some point, and you look at a chart and then it's like, because I've seen it, I don't know exactly the source offhand, but you see a chart of people in certain tax brackets, and compared to the middle class, the wealthy just have like a vastly more tax cuts. Even though, yeah, of course, they make a lot more money. And, we have to talk about marginal rates when it comes to wealthy people, of course, but we shouldn't be just acquiescing like this to the wealthy and just being like, yeah, we're gonna, just make it, even more easier for you, as we've always been doing. So, I mean, it's like with the Bush tax cuts, because there were some good middle class tax cuts in there. But yes, it is dangerous because of the fact that we look back at history and look at how we've repeated this. The Great Depression, the Roaring '20s, we deregulated and then we got, a disaster. We got the 1930s, which were like a complete desolate wasteland. Then we have the end of the 80s with Reagan. Reagan deregulated, and the stock market crashed. And it was an economic downturn, and the 90s were kind of like a downer generation to some degree. It wasn't quite as bad as the Depression, but when it did crash, it was the worst that it had been since then. We had a period of growth, like with the 50s, and then this was like the lowest point for us. Then the subprime mortgage crisis, under Bush. George W. Bush, of course. And this was the same thing as well. I mean, the wealthy and the banks were getting away with murder. They were defrauding people left and right. This is what Goldman Sachs is all about. What they were doing was simply selling a product to people, and then when they bought it, they were not given that. That's what you boil it down to. They were defrauded. And people would buy the subprime mortgages, which were like given as like you're going to save money. It's like a great deal. And then once the interest rates kick in and they were like extremely high, people couldn't afford it, and then you had a crisis in your hand with the economy because no one was spending money in the economy, and then it crashed. So, despite all that, yeah, we see handouts with the rich. The bank bailout. Yeah, hello. We are constantly giving into this kind of mentality. Corporate subsidies. I mean, we are not allowing the green industry to thrive and combat climate change. We prioritize the oil companies so much with the corporate subsidies. It's like so much more times money than we give to the green industry. And the oil companies are already rich. They're some of the richest companies in the world. So, at the end of the day, the American people are just progressive, and like I was kind of saying before, no amount of speech is going to change the system. I'm a firm believer that you have to change the system from within, and it's very hard to do that, but the money that goes into these special interests is simply too great and preventing the country from being a democracy. And we claim we're a democracy all the time, but this is simply not true. Study after study shows we don't affect policy. We're supposed to live in a representative republic, democracy, whatever. We elect people to represent our views, and this is just not what happens all the time. This should have been the message of Hillary's campaign from the beginning, but that never happened. Bernie came along, shook things up, he invigorated people, but again, the power of the establishment was too great, and there's so much evidence of this. I mean, Debbie Wasserman Schultz in the behind the scenes in the campaign, just like rigging the system against him with the debate schedule. Half the superdelegates were already in Hillary's pocket before anyone voted for anything. They clearly had their bias towards Hillary. This is just true. And they would cover, Trump with, like, at the time, small, like a room, like maybe 100 people. Even the same story, with Hillary. She might be in like a small arena, and then Bernie just fills up these stadiums, and you get very little press coverage of it. And this is certainly by design. Okay, we look at the people that fund Hillary's campaign, fund the media. I'm not trying to be Alex Jones here, but I think there might be a little bit of a link. Okay, well, okay. Maybe I shouldn't go that far, but we know that their interests align. We know that they're neoliberal centrist hacks, and that is who pushes the buttons at the end of the day. So I think the main takeaway of all this is that the Democratic Party needs to stop shying away from the needs of the middle class, and they have to understand. I mean, Medicare for All is just very popular now, even amongst Republicans. It is, but we still have to just do this wishy-washy dance, whether it's with Chuck Schumer, who's like going on there like, well, we're gonna agree where we agree, and then where we don't agree, we'll compromise, and if it doesn't change our values, then we're fine. Ha! Well, that doesn't say anything about what you stand for. you have to, if you're going to compromise, people are going to want to know, how far you're willing to go. And they're trying to keep their options open because they don't want to insult anyone. That they're trying to be, careful in terms of the Bernie wing, the super progressive wing, if you will. But they don't want to actually do the noble thing and just stand behind Bernie and his legislation because it's the right thing to do. You see certain Democrats like Kamala Harris come out and voice support of that, but at the same time, she's all happy with Dianne Feinstein announcing her campaign for re-election, and she does it by announcing it on Twitter and using Republican talking points. She's like, there's so many things to do. We have to, do gun reform. That's great. Fight climate change. That's great. And then we need access to health care. Access to health care. That's like, this is what Ted Cruz says. This is what Lindsey Graham says. You're not fighting for a universal system by doing that. I mean, are you for it or are you not? What idea do you have to get better access to healthcare? I'd love to hear Dianne Feinstein talk about it. We're going to do what? Have a public option? Great. But in the meantime, we have to have this goal in mind. And fighting for Medicare for all is just not, it's not this crazy radical thing. This has historical precedence. And again, we're the only modern nation that doesn't have a universal form of health care of some point, of some kind, excuse me. So she is not willing to talk that way about healthcare, about going after the private insurers, because she's bought by them. That she gets campaign donations from them, and so do a lot of Democrats. So it's an embarrassment to the party to not have any ounce of introspection and realize that the hearts of the American people are with Bernie across all the issues. It's not just health care. If you go to the $15 minimum wage, they're for him. 80% of the country is for a $15 minimum wage. Even universal background checks. A majority of the country is for that, and a majority of NRA members are for that. When have you seen the NRA argue for a universal background check? I bet never.